I'm Dr. Sandy Musclow, a naturopathic physician and Chinese medicine practitioner in the Upper Ottawa Valley, serving Barry's Bay, Bancroft, Quadville area. And I've decided to put together this little video today because we were asked to do a presentation for the Madawaska Valley Horticultural Society, and due to the current day conditions, we're not able to meet together in person tomorrow. So I thought that as a gift, I would offer a plant observation study or a plant meditation. Some people also refer to this study as a listening study. This is something that I was introduced to back in 2012 when I started going to anthroposophical medical trainings down in California. Anthroposophical medicine is a type of medicine that I practice as part of my naturopathic and Chinese medicine practice, and it basically means human wisdom, or how do we bring in the wisdom of the human being and work with that in our daily life and in our medical life. The plant observation studies have been set up as something that we do over 3 to 5 days in these medical trainings, and we'll spend usually an hour and a half every morning going back to the same plant every day over 5 days. This is something that we can do, or you can do if you want to over the next few days, or you can kind of limit it all into an hour, 30 minutes. As you start to do this more and more in your life, which is kind of the purpose overall, is to get you to have a relationship with the plant world, you might find that you just sort of intuitively do this in your garden with your plants, your house plants, that sort of thing. Ideally, we would do this outside, but given that we still have a few feet of snow over most of the land, and it's kind of difficult to get outside right now with the snow, it's easier to pick a house plant. I've picked a house plant that I'm hoping that most of you don't have at your home. I haven't seen many of these in the valley unless I've given them to you. So this is helpful for us to do this meditation overall. Picking a plant that you don't know is ideal. Also, picking a plant that you do know, but forgetting everything you know about it for a little while is also helpful. So again, we can do this plant study over 3 to 5 days. You can do it overnight. The idea also with the 3 to 5 days is the more we take anything that we study into our sleep, the more we wake up with more knowledge about it. Sometimes we dream about the plant, sometimes we wake up with an inspiration of the plant. Sometimes doing these studies can help us understand something else about our lives that we've been struggling with or trying to work through. So I encourage you to spend a little bit more time than just one day with this exercise. The plant study is done usually in 4 to 6 steps. We're going to go through about 6 steps today, and we'll pause after each one and just collect our thoughts with this. This might be something you would want to grab a piece of paper, a pen, get some colored pencils out if you want to, your watercolors, modeling clay. We are going to bring an artistic element into this, and this might be something that you do as you develop your study with the plants in general. So what we do now is called our first impression of the plant. The first impression is something that we all know much about. Like when we meet someone, we always say, oh, my first impression of that person was they were very warm, very soft, very friendly, or, you know, I got a really prickly sense from that guy or whatnot. That's what we're going for right now. At this point in the study, we're not looking at, you know, the fine details of the plant, but just we want to look at it, get an idea of like how it sits in us, sits in our soul, and then back off. So to start with, we can ask the plant for its permission to work with it. That can be however you want. So that might just be a moment of silence. You can close your eyes. So what we're doing here is just asking that, you know, spiritual being, since every living thing has a spiritual entity behind it that's bringing it into the physical, we're just asking that, hey, can we have a relationship with that? So right now we have this plant. I'm just going to have an observational look at it. I'm not looking at any details. You can just kind of be still. Okay, and then I ask myself, what am I taking away from this plant? This might be something that you want to write down. If you're doing this with a partner or with a group of people, this might be where you start to share some ideas. My impression of this plant right now is that it's warm, it's inviting, but it also has this like, hey, keep away a little bit. There's a sense of, I want to work with you, I don't want to work with you. A little bit of warmth, inviting. Seems very old and prehistoric to me. It seems otherworldly, and then it doesn't fit in this area. It doesn't fit in rural Ontario, really. And it kind of has its own, seems like it has its own thing going on. It doesn't really match the other plants that I also have. So yeah, this is a first impression. Something I'd like to say about first impressions is that we can easily think that the first impression is really about what's in front of us. You know, it's really about that plant or about that person or about that thing that we're experiencing with. But I invite you to think about our first impression really reflecting on our inner life and what we bring to that impression. You know, the first impression, in my opinion, is really telling me how open I am that day. You know, maybe the person I meet is a bit prickly because I am, or maybe they're warm because I'm feeling a lot of love and warmth that day as well. And you know, I think we have that relationship with the plant world as well. So this is the second part of the plant observation study, where we get really scientific with this. So our first part of the study was our first impression. You know, what was our first impression of the plant when we sat with it and had a look at it and then went off and just had a bit of a reflection in our mind. So it's more of like that intuitive imagination aspect. And now to fill in that intuitive imagination, we're coming into the plant and looking at all of the details. So this is where we want to be as scientific as possible and using all of our senses available to us. You know, our sight, what does it look like? What does it smell like? If it's not a poisonous plant, if you know your plant, what does it taste like? What does it feel like? So this is where we dig in. And I'll just share some of my observations of this plant right now with you so you get an idea of it. Is interestingly, putting these plants on this table, what I've noticed is a lot of these little things fell onto the surface of the table. And if this is jostled even a little bit, some of these things will fall onto the table. And the one that looks like it's more yellow seems to be dropping more of those things onto the table. I see not a plant that's upright, but a lot of curling and curviness. This plant seems to have a lot of like bluish tinge in this part of the plant. And then there's white specks in it. And then the leaves have this central vein here. And then it seems to have some radial veins out here. It's not important for this part of the exercise that you know any scientific or botany names at all. Just, you know, green things, yellow, you know, colors, that sort of thing. That's totally fine. There's a lot of these little things that seem to be really rounded and then have these white things coming off of them. They seem to be bigger at the tips of these leaves as such. The leaves kind of all point outward. There's a serratedness to them that also flies out to the outward away from this stem. All right, so this third step of this meditation and this exercise is to loosen our thinking and start to think about this plant in time. How do we know what stage our plant is in? Is it in maturity? Is it a young plant? Is it an old plant? Does this plant go to seed? Does it flower and go to seed and then the seed drops into the soil and then we create a new plant? Where are we at in the sequence? Luckily, so this is something that you're going to figure out on your own with your own plant. You know, we can think of the trees. They have a really long cycle, you know, with the pine cones and whatnot. We also have the dandelions that have a very fast cycle. So, you know, come spring, we'll have a lot of opportunity to play with a lot of different plants and the timing of their reproductive cycle. But for this plant, what I see as the stages of growth from my observation and just from living with this plant is that it looks like these things that have been dropping from the leaves are the babies or the newer growth of the plant. And I actually planted some of them on Sunday, which was 4 days ago, and they will take to the soil here and produce produce new plants. Also, this one I know that I have planted about 3 years ago, and then this one 2 years ago, and then all of the babies that we can see inside the plant have been coming up as the plant starts to shed some of the babies itself. So here's another one here. So I can see the stages of growth where we go from like one little baby that drops off of the leaf to forming its own leafiness. And then when it starts to form its own leafiness, new plants start to grow on that leafiness. And then they fall, and then they create a new plant, and then they create more leafiness and new plants. So there's this regeneration cycle here. Your plant may have a flower, and it may have seeds. This particular plant doesn't have that, so that might be something that you bring in with your own plant. At this point, I would also encourage you to draw this. Draw this plant from seed to seed, and then start to work with this image back and forth in your mind. How does this plant go from seedling to producing another seed in the future? All right, so step 4 of this study is the plant personality, or what is the soul of this plant? So you can have a look at the plant and say, if this plant was a person, what kind of personality or temperament would this plant have? Would they have a choleric personality where they're really upright and really in your face, or very sanguine, very loving and really wanting to connect with you and be your friend, or more melancholic and like held back, or more just not even interested in meeting you at all? So this might be something that might not be very obvious to you right away, that you might have to meditate with, or put this plant in a different part of your house, or if you're studying a plant outside, you know, walking by it, trying to find other plants on the property, see if this plant really likes to be with other plants of its kind, or if it likes to be a loner, that sort of thing. So seeing that plant in its environment is very helpful. In step 2, we talked about all of the observations of the plant. We also want to observe, where does this plant grow in nature? Is it in the sun? Is it in the shade? Is it in wet? Is it not? Is it with other of its kin? Or does it like to be in other things? Where does it pop up? And so, you know, when we're really looking at these plants, we want to know what kind of personality it has in the community. So for this plant, you know, you can sit with it, and I think this plant is like a really busy and really warm plant. I think it has a lot of warmth and a lot of giving qualities, but it also has a mission, it has lots to do. That's what I would say about this plant. The next step of this exercise, the being of the plant, similar to the exercise that we just did, is trying to figure out in one or two words what would sum this plant up in general. Sometimes it's the same as what the soul or personality is of this plant. And the soul and personality of the plant, we can also think of this plant as a person that we think of, or some other experience that we might have. You know, it might remind you of your Aunt Melody or something like that. So you can kind of have that kind of picture in your mind as well. But, you know, the overall gesture of this plant is, you know, to me, it's a giving mother. It seems to have a lot of babies. It seems to be very prolific. It really gives a lot of its life forces to its babies. And then it tends to dry up after she's had her babies. So she's really, really giving and giving and striving for proliferation and procreation. So the last step in the plant meditation is allowing the plant to reveal itself to you. So at this point, we can start to research. You can look at literature, you can look at Google, whatever your resources are to figure out what the uses are and what even the name is of this plant. Now would be the time to look that up. If you haven't already, maybe starting to get an idea of what you might think this plant might be used for in nutrition, medicine, in the garden, that sort of thing. Some of the plants might be very obvious that you've chosen, like your carrot and that sort of thing, but looking at the plant gesture and going, okay, if we are studying a carrot, why is the root orange? Or You know, if we're studying calendula, why are the flowers coming up every month of the year? That sort of thing. So start to get a little bit curious about why this plant might be interesting to us. So before I reveal the name of this plant, I do want to say that the way we use it in medicine can be in pregnancy, actually. For mothers who have a lot of hypertension during pregnancy, we can use this to help calm down the mother. We use this in anthroposophic medicine more prominently in Europe than we have here in Canada, but we use this to calm down the mother. And it's also used a lot for menopausal symptoms and for PMS and menstrual tension overall. It really relaxes those uterine muscles. So from here we can kind of see that we have this gesture of motherliness, reproduction and whatnot. And there have been studies to show that this plant is actually quite effective in these uses overall. I will say too, I use this plant a lot here as tincture form. I have a couple tinctures that I use pretty regularly. This plant is called Bryophyllum. Bryophyllum is in the Kalanchoe family. That's Kalanchoe. So you may have seen different kinds of this plant or this family overall. This is just one of the kinds of Bryophyllum or Bryophyllum. Some people will pronounce it that way. But it comes from the Greek word sprouting leaf. And this plant is usually found in the tropics. It's a tropical plant, as can be evidenced by the kind of the leaf structure and that sort of thing. It's really good as a houseplant in Canada. It definitely wouldn't survive the winter outside in our -20 conditions. So yeah, something that likes a lot of heat, a lot of warmth, a lot of moisture, lives in the equatorial regions, less so in the tropics or up at the poles overall. This plant I use primarily for a lot of anxiety and tension and people who are really pent up and can't relax. This has also been used in anthroposophic psychiatric situations where people are very agitated. They will actually use it as an injection form to calm people down. I don't do that necessarily. I just use tinctures, and there's some from the US that I use pretty regularly, Bryophyllum avena, which is this plant, as well as oat. Oat also has a quality of being very calming and relaxing. So together, those can help people who aren't able to sleep because of agitation, nervousness. Also, when people have panic attacks during the day and a lot of anxiousness and whatnot, I will use this medicine as well. I will combine it in some formulas. I also use this plant or this remedy. I don't tincture this myself. I don't have the capacity to tincture it myself, and I don't recommend anyone do that. But I also use this plant for people who are, have been going through chemo or going through any sort of chronic disease where they're not really able to build themselves up. This plant has a lot of upbuilding forces, a lot of reproduction forces. If we don't have a lot of forces in our body to reproduce, then we definitely don't have enough to really keep ourselves going. So in order to sustain people and get people kind of built up a little bit more, I will also use this medicine. So people who have had a bout of pneumonia, we know it always takes a long time to recover from that. I will use this medicine in this case to help people to convalesce overall. There's also an indication in some of the anthroposophic healing plant textbooks where this is a really good remedy to use if your hands are agitated from washing too much, which may be the case in recent times where we're being asked to wash our hands very diligently. So yeah, if you want to, a good place to start would be to Google, start getting onto some plant websites, start looking into the healing aspect of your plant overall, and you'd be really surprised to find even the things that you think are ditch weeds are actually plants that have a lot of healing capacity in them. We have a lot of mullein on the side of the road here. We have a lot of St. John's wort, dandelion grows in our backyard. All of those have tons of possibilities for medicinal and nutritional uses. So have fun with it, get to know your plants, get to do this with more and more plants, and come together with other people and see what they've deduced, and see if you found the same qualities as your friends did with these plants. I've been in groups where we've all done individual study and come back after 30, 40 minutes and come up with the same gestures or same personalities or same uses just by looking at the plant, and none of us knowing what the plant is. So, I really encourage that kind of work together. So this is the plant meditation study. I hope you had a good time with it. I hope you really work with it. Let it go to sleep with you. Have some dreams about it. Share it with others. Share it with me if you want to. And hopefully we'll get out in the field and do some of this outside when it's spring. Thank you.